Well, here we are. It's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and this is the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who appears to be leading this briefing.
In terms of the president's engagement today in engaging with his national security team, and then make a few comments broadly on the situation, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. This morning, the president spoke with his military commanders for an operational briefing on the security at the Hamid Karzai International Airport, commonly known as HKIA. He spoke with Secretary Austin, Chairman Milley, General McKenzie, Admiral Vaisley, and myself. The president was briefed that DoD personnel have now secured HKIA. HKIA is open, and U.S. military evacuation flights are taking off. Following this operational briefing with his military commanders, the president and the vice president met by secure video conference with their national security team to hear intelligence, security, and diplomatic updates on the evolving situation in Afghanistan. They discussed the status of ongoing evacuations of U.S. citizens, SIV applicants, and other vulnerable Afghans at risk, and how we would do this safely and efficiently, and with a laser focus of the team on monitoring for and preventing any potential terrorist threats at or around HKIA, including from ISIS-K. They were joined by Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, Chairman Milley, Director Haynes, Director Burns, myself, Ambassador Wilson, Ambassador Khalilzad, General McKenzie, and other senior officials. Just to say a few words about where we come from and where we are. I want to start by saluting our troops and our civilian personnel at the Kabul airport. I want to salute the Defense Department, the intelligence community, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and especially our country team in Kabul, who have been doing incredible work under very trying circumstances. They have safely and effectively drawn down our embassy compound and retrograded our diplomatic personnel. They have now secured the airfield and are conducting flights out of the country. They are moving American citizens, as well as Afghan nationals and third country nationals. They are facilitating flights for our allies and partners to get citizens and others out of Afghanistan. These operations will continue in the coming days as we move to evacuate American citizens and Afghan nationals who worked with us, along with other vulnerable Afghans. We are engaging diplomatically at the same time with allies in regional countries and with the United Nations to address the situation in Afghanistan. We are in contact with the Taliban to ensure the safe passage of people to the airport. We are monitoring for any potential terrorist threats, as I just mentioned, including from ISIS-K. We intend to continue these operations over the coming days before completing our drawdown. When you work on any policy issue, domestic policy, foreign policy, any policy issue, the human costs and consequences loom large. And we're all contending with the human costs of these developments. The images from the past couple of days at the airport have been heartbreaking. But President Biden had to think about the human costs of the alternative path as well, which was to stay in the middle of a civil conflict in Afghanistan. There are those who argue that with 2,500 forces, the number of forces in country when President Biden took office, we could have sustained a stable, peaceful Afghanistan. That is simply wrong. The previous administration drew down from 15,000 troops to 2,500 troops. And even at 15,000, the Afghan government forces were losing ground. What has unfolded over the past month has proven decisively that it would have taken a significant American troop presence, multiple times greater than what President Biden was handed, to stop a Taliban onslaught. And we would have taken casualties. American men and women would have been fighting and dying once again in Afghanistan, and President Biden was not prepared to send additional forces or ask any American personnel to do that over the period ahead. There have been questions raised about whether we should have drawn down our embassy and evacuated our Afghan allies earlier. These are reasonable questions. We did dramatically accelerate the SIV process and move out a substantial number of SIV applicants and their families. But the Afghan government and its supporters, including many of the people now seeking to leave, made a passionate case that we should not conduct a mass evacuation lest we trigger a loss of confidence in the government. Now, our signaling support for the government obviously did not save the government, but this was a considered judgment. When you conclude 20 years of military action in a civil war in another country, with the impacts of 20 years of decisions that have piled up, you have to make a lot of hard calls, none with clean outcomes. What you can do is plan for all contingencies. We did that. The American forces now on the ground at HKIA are there because of contingency planning and drilling we did over the course of months, preparing for a range of scenarios, including dire scenarios. President Biden ordered multiple battalions to be pre-positioned in theater, and he had activated them for deployment before the fall of Kabul. He also put additional battalions on a short string here in the United States. Those battalions have now flowed in as well. Yes, there were chaotic scenes yesterday, but as Admiral Kirby said, even well-drawn plans don't survive first contact with reality, and they require adjustments, and we've made those adjustments. We will stay in close touch with our allies and partners in the days ahead as we contend with the immediate need to complete the evacuation mission and as we deal with the broader challenges posed by the new reality in Afghanistan. And we will remain persistently vigilant against the terrorism threat in Afghanistan and in multiple other theaters across multiple continents. We have proven in other places that we can suppress terrorism without a permanent military presence on the ground, and we intend to do exactly that in Afghanistan. And with that, I would be happy to take your questions. Yes.
So I wanted to ask, the president yesterday said that the buck stops with him. I want to get an understanding of what did he mean by, what is he taking ownership of? Not just the decision to leave Afghanistan, but is he taking responsibility for the chaos that happened during the evacuations, for the decisions not to do evacuations sooner? Is he taking responsibility for that and for any bloodshed that may be happening right now? Is he taking responsibility for that?
He's taking responsibility for every decision the United States government took with respect to Afghanistan because, as he said, the buck stops with him. I am also taking responsibility, and so are my colleagues, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the directors of our intelligence agencies. We as a national security team collectively take responsibility for every decision, good decision, every decision that doesn't produce perfect outcomes. That is what responsibility is. Now, at the same time, that doesn't change the fact that there are other parties here responsible as well, who have taken actions and decisions that help lead us to where we are. So from our perspective, what we have to do now is focus on the task at hand, the mission at hand. You mentioned chaos at the airport yesterday. At the end of the day, the question is, can we effectively evacuate those people who we intend to evacuate? And that is what we are planning for and executing against beginning today, where the airport is secure, the flights are going, the people are coming, and we will continue to do that in the days ahead. Yes.
Yeah. What is President Biden's response to the people of Afghanistan who are now in the hands of the Taliban terrorists and feel abandoned by the United States, or to those in Taiwan and elsewhere that are fearful that the U.S. will abandon them to the aggression of China? And follow-up to that is, what is President Biden's response to people in Israel and other countries who might also believe that the U.S. will abandon them to terrorists?
So to the first question, President Biden and all of us, as I said in my opening comments, are heartbroken by the human consequences that have unfolded and could continue to unfold in Afghanistan. We believe passionately in human rights and human dignity, and we want to work with the international community to advance that wherever we can. But President Biden was not prepared to have American men and women continue to fight and die in the civil war of another country in order to achieve that. We will use every other tool at our disposal to achieve that, and we will do so day after day, month after month in the period ahead on behalf of the people of Afghanistan. To your question about allies, we gave 20 years of American blood, treasure, sweat, and tears in Afghanistan. We gave them every capacity in terms of training and equipment to stand up and fight for themselves. And at some point, it was the time for the United States to say that the Afghan people had to stand up for themselves. We believe that our commitments to our allies and partners are sacrosanct and always have been. We believe our commitment to Taiwan and to Israel remains as strong as it's ever been. Keep in mind that with respect to Afghanistan, we said back in 2011 that we would be out in 2014. We stayed another 7 years, far and above and beyond the commitment that we made more than a decade ago. And the last thing that I would say is that President Biden is laser focused on accomplishing the core national security objectives of the United States. And when it comes to Afghanistan, that was getting bin Laden and degrading Al Qaeda. We accomplished that, and he believes it was time for our troops to come home. Yes.
So just now, Jake, you described a kind of choice that the president, that was in front of the president. Either save the folks, the allies in Afghanistan, the folks that helped the United States through the last 2 decades, or sacrifice more American young men. I think the question out there on Capitol Hill and around Washington and elsewhere is, wasn't there another choice? Wasn't there a way you could have ended, President Biden could have ended the war in the way that he wanted to end the war so that Americans don't sacrifice further lives for this war, but at the same time do a better job of either ignoring Ghani's request to not start evacuations, or figuring some way that we wouldn't end up in a situation where there's masses of people crushing through the airport, and the execution of the last 4, 5, 6 days that has seemed to just about everybody as not, is not the way a competent administration, not the result that a competent administration, has in the end. So isn't that a false choice? And why couldn't you do both?
So first, what I would say is that we were clear-eyed going in when we made this decision that it was possible that the Taliban would end up in control of Afghanistan. We were clear-eyed about that. Now, as the president said in his remarks yesterday, we did not anticipate that it would happen at this speed, though we were planning for these potential contingencies. The reason I say that at the outset, that we knew it was possible they could take over, and that had to be built into our calculus in making the determination, as the president did, to draw down our forces, is because once the Taliban came into Kabul, we were going to be faced with a situation, no matter if there were still U.S. troops on the ground or no U.S. troops on the ground, of dealing with a significant number of people wanting to come to an airport to try to get evacuated. I'll give you an example. We communicated with American citizens for weeks, telling them to get out of the country. We offered financial assistance for those who wouldn't be able to afford to get on flights themselves. Many chose to stay right till the end, and that was their choice. We now are faced with a circumstance where we have to help evacuate those. That's our responsibility as the U.S. government. But the point I'm making is that when a civil war comes to an end with an opposing force marching on the Capitol, there are going to be scenes of chaos. There are going to be lots of people leaving the country. That is not something that can be fundamentally avoided. And so while it is a point for reasonable debate, in my view, as to how to think about the right moment to signal a complete loss of confidence in a government or not, and which is going to lead to more suffering and death or not. The fact is that we made the judgments we made based on the information we had at the time while preparing for the alternative contingency, which was having to flow in these troops to be able to get out folks in a mass evacuation. Yes?
Do you believe that the mission could be completed by August 21st? As a national security advisor, what do you see the scenario on September 1st? Do you think the Taliban of 2021 are different than 2001? Do you see analogous situation to Iraq where a new terrorist organization will be born, like ISIS out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, for example?
So just on the last point, it's fairly well documented that the Taliban and ISIS-K fight one another, struggle against one another. So I do not foresee a symbiotic relationship there, though these are dynamic scenarios, so we will have to see how it plays. We are working day by day to get as many people out. So I'm not going to speculate on the timetable question that you just laid out. And then finally, on what we expect from the Taliban going forward, that is something that will have to be watched and observed over time, whether in fact they are prepared to meet their obligations to the basic human rights and human dignity of people, to the safe passage of people to the airport, to the fair and just treatment of civilians. That is something they're going to have to show. I come at this with no expectations, but only a sense that they will have to prove to the international community who they ultimately are going to end up being. Yes.
Thank you, Jake. Can you tell us what is it exactly, the commitment that you have secured from the Taliban regarding the safe passage of Americans as well as the tens of thousands of vulnerable Afghans?
The Taliban have informed us that they are prepared to provide the safe passage of civilians to the airport, and we intend to hold them to that commitment.
Do you believe them?
Yes.
Just for clarity on that, is there some deadline that's been set? Has the Taliban assurances that this will go till August 31st? Is the deadline before that or after that? For clarity on what you just said.
We believe that this can go till the 31st. We are talking to them about what the exact timetable is for how this will all play out, and I don't want to negotiate in public on working out the best modality to get the most people out in the most efficient way possible.
I have a question about yesterday. President Biden said that the United States military cannot sacrifice where there is no national interest. If the same analogies, will the U.S. withdraw troops from its allies, including South Korea? What is your comment?
So the president, as he has said repeatedly, has no intention of drawing down our forces from South Korea or from Europe, where we have sustained troop presences for a very long time, not in the middle of a civil war, but to deal with the potential of an external enemy and to protect our ally against that external enemy. So it is a fundamentally different kind of situation from the one we are presented with in Afghanistan.
Thank you. The president yesterday said the situation in Afghanistan unfolded more quickly than anticipated. You said it yourself just a few moments ago. But numerous officials have told ABC that there were key intelligence assessments warning the Taliban could overwhelm the country and take the capital within weeks. Did the White House disregard that intelligence and push ahead?
I'm not actually familiar with the intelligence assessments you're describing, but I also don't want to get into specific intelligence products. And one thing I will not do from this podium or anywhere else is talk about what a different component of the interagency did or didn't do, because from my perspective, we are one team with one mission, trying to execute and do so in the best interests of our interests and values. So I will
The mission is not complete by August 31st, and there are Americans and Afghan allies who remain there. Will U.S. troops stay until everyone is out, or will they leave?
So I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. What I'm going to do is stay focused on the task at hand, which is getting as many people out as rapidly as possible, and we will take that day by day.
You can't commit to bringing back every American.
There's a large number of Christian missionaries and aid workers that are particularly vulnerable because they're known to be Christians. Is there any plan to get them to the airport and get them out?
We are working with a variety of different types of groups, journalists, aid workers, NGO workers, and so forth, to help facilitate their departure from the country. Yes.
They talk about these contingency plans, but the President of the United States left the White House on Friday. When did your administration know that another 6,000 troops were going to be needed for this withdrawal?
So on Wednesday evening, the President convened the principals, this is last Wednesday evening, to discuss the deteriorating situation on the ground in Afghanistan. He posed the question as to whether we had to flow more forces in from the point of view of a contingency to draw down our embassy and to secure evacuation. Thursday morning, he gave the order to begin flowing those forces in. And then as we watched the situation unfold over the course of the coming days, we determined that we would go from step one of that contingency plan, which was about 3,000 troops, to step two of that contingency plan, which was about 6,000 troops.
Why did he leave the White House? On Thursday he knew. Why did he leave the White House on Friday?
The president worked throughout the entire weekend. I was intimately familiar with his working habits over the course of the weekend because I was on the phone with him constantly. Secretary Austin was on the phone with him, Chairman Milley, Secretary Blinken, the team in country. So he was monitoring developments hour by hour throughout that entire time and has been making a series of decisions about troop deployments, giving us direction and guidance about how to take the shape of this mission and make sure that we're executing it. And at every turn, asking our military who is leading this mission and executing this mission with bravery and valor, what do you need? I will get you anything you need. He asked that question multiple times every single day. So President Biden has been deeply engaged in this. Yes.
Sorry, there's a lot of anger in Australia this morning about the way this has played out. We've got citizens and then of course so many Afghans who have helped the Australian forces and helping the US mission over the past 20 years. Does the administration accept some responsibility, or perhaps what would be your response to those people who are trapped and some are fearing execution because of the exit strategy, or perhaps lack of competent exit strategy?
We do take some responsibility for our allies and partners in Afghanistan. In fact, as I said in my opening comments, we are working to facilitate flights and have already done so for countries that have lined them up and gotten their citizens to the airport. And we will be eager to work with Australia to help get out Australian citizens and other individuals who the Australians would like to see get out. Yes.
Jake, what do you say to the next generation of Afghan women and children, young girls who face fundamentally different human rights moving forward?
I say that truly, deeply, my heart goes out to Afghan women and girls in the country today under the Taliban. We've seen what they've done before. And that's a very hard thing for any of us to face. But this wasn't a choice just between saving those women and girls and not saving those women and girls. The alternative choice had its own set of human costs and consequences, as I said. And those human costs and consequences would have involved a substantial ramp up of American participation in a civil war with more loss of life, more bloodshed, families here in the United States who would be asking a different form of the question you just asked. These are the choices a president has to make. And it doesn't mean because we don't have forces in that country that we're not going to fight on behalf of women and girls and human rights and human dignity. We are. We do. In many other countries where we don't have active military participation. And we'll do it in Afghanistan too. And we will attempt to use every measure of tool and influence we have, along with our international allies and partners, to alleviate the burden that those women and girls will face in the days ahead. We are absolutely, resolutely committed to that. Yes.
And that's what makes, I'm going to weigh in on this, and that's what makes America what America is towards us being one of the greatest nations on the planet. And to this day, it's still in our decree that is exactly what our ancestors has set us a sail towards doing, which is not only to create a more perfect democracy over here in America, but to get all nations, all countries, small or great, to be fair-minded and to do the right thing pertaining to humanitarian rights. What I don't understand is how come they're asking the questions at bay in regards towards everything being present, rather not it being past tense. In other words, we didn't cause the uprising in the Middle East, and you got to say the Middle East because it's more than just one. We didn't cause the uprising of the ideology towards wanting to destroy Israel and destroy America. Somebody else caused that. We didn't cause a group of people to load up and learn how to fly airplanes, but nobody was concerned about how to land them and create or cause 9/11. These are all entities that has happened beyond our control. Beyond our control. And for some reason, not just the American reporters, but all reporters, they want to initiate the blame game going on right now towards what didn't happen. I'm really surprised, to be quite honest with you. I'm surprised that it didn't wind up into a full-fledged battle. And to hear the Taliban get on some sort of a news broadcast or TV broadcast in taking over the embassy over there and make all these allowances towards what they're going to do, and they're going to give women this, and they're going to give women that, and they're going to have women in their government, and all this other stuff. Well, you know, we've all heard the wind blow before pertaining to Whistling Dixie. But until we actually see those occurrences happening out of the Taliban, that's exactly what they're doing. They're whistling Dixie. Because we have seen the rootless corruption, that the barbaric behavior that goes beyond just somebody being greedy or selfish, but we have seen their tactics and their measures in what they want to do, just like looking at 9/11. Just like looking at other things that has occurred in the past 25, 30, 40 years. This thing didn't just start yesterday. It didn't just start yesterday. There's been socialism and communism in existence now, I guess, going back to the beginning of time. You know, just like China. They have stepped on their citizens' human rights towards still being a predominant communist country. Just like Russia. They've done the exact same thing to their citizens over there. Well, whenever the falling of the Berlin Wall took place 30-something years ago, we was hoping, I repeat, hope. You know, you can hope in one hand and poo-poo in the other and see which one fills up the quickest. But we was hoping that the Russian oligarchs would have had the decency towards running their government similar towards how that we run ours. And they do give that image from an outer layer. But we know what's going on the inside of the layer, which is contradicting to that in which what they're telling everybody else. I mean, it's pretty obvious whenever you have an elected president that used to be a KGB officer that's been in there now for I don't know how many years, of how corrupt that their voting system, if they even have a voting system, is towards keeping that one person in power. Whenever you have hundreds of thousands of people stand up and protest pertaining to their government, it pretty well speaks volumes about what's going on. Now you may be saying, well, what difference is it of those citizens in Russia protesting versus the citizens here in America? Well, once more, you've got to take into consideration there's a difference in protesting, and it's a difference in creating riots and becoming destructive. That's exactly what happened January the 6th. That was not a peaceful protest. That turned into an all-out and out riot. That is, once more, against our abiding laws of the land, that, yeah, you can protest, but you can't get out here and burn and village and rape and murder and do what you're trying to do, all in a forceful pretense. I don't care if it's 101, 1,001, or 1,000,001. You still can't do it that way, because once you do it that way, if you was to succeed, it would be considered an illegal government that has established that land. That's like the Taliban. The Taliban is not welcome in Afghanistan. What they have done is illegal on an international global scale by coming in, intimidating, frightening, infuriating the people and allowing for them to surrender and give up their arms. It's still illegal the way that they done it. Now, if it would have been brought before committees, if they would have voted on it, that would have been a different story. But they didn't do it that way. They done it forcefully. And because they done it forcefully, that means they're just a bunch of hoodlums, a bunch of outlaws, a bunch of criminals, people that you cannot put any type of credibility in their word, in what that they say, based upon the past experiences towards what that they have done. I really commend our president, our chief and commander, because without him having the gall to do what he done, this thing was going to drag out endless amount of year after year after year. And of course, once something like that ever becomes implemented in that particular region or that particular country, then you got to wonder how many people is actually doing it out of loyalty and how many people are doing it because everybody else is saying that it's the right thing to do. So once President Biden lifted that shield or lifted that particular movement, we see now how that the Taliban went in and basically railroaded them poor people in surrendering and giving up their arms. That's the reason why I indicate again and again and again and again, as a spiritual leader, as somebody that is familiar with the good and the bad, that's the reason why I say that all of this on the drawing board did not just begin a few years ago or even 50 or 100 years ago. You got to get in the Bible and you got to study all the way to the Persian Empire and go all the way back into the book of Daniel and figuring out just exactly what this evil demonic entity was, what it intended to do, and the reason for God the Father lifting his holy hand up off of that region, other than Israel, lifting his hand up off of that region and giving it to a nation that was bearing forth the fruits thereof, pertaining to America, pertaining to all the ministers and evangelists and missionaries that we have sent overseas, not just in one particular area, but all over the world, towards trying to teach others the same frame of mind of democracy, of the fairness of humanitarian rights. If you dig deeper into their fundamental thoughts in what that they want to do, they're actually wanting to do the exact same thing that Hitler wanted to do towards dominating the world. That's exactly what Hitler wanted to do. He had set out to dominate the world. He actually sent people over here in America in the 30s to help indoctrinate people. That way they would be sympathizers once the ugly monster did finally rise its head up out of that particular entity, that we would have sympathizers over here that could actually make a difference on whether or not we was going to have empathy and sympathy for Hitler, or whether or not we was going to be subjected of being opposed to what he was trying to do. And as badly as I hate wars, I'm going to say that World War II was the generation of the greatest people in the world, pertaining to them recognizing this evil entity and how that it needed to be tromped and stomped out. And that's exactly what our ancestors done during the initiation of the latter part of World War II. They identified this disguised imposter. They identified how that it was growing in leaps and bounds, and of course, what broke the camel's back was whenever we got attacked by Japan at Pearl Harbor. That's whenever our men and women the next day started lining up towards volunteering, towards wanting to go to war against this evil entity that occurred during the latter part of, well, almost not just during the latter part, but during the part of World War II. Because the whole thing from the front end to the back end was pertaining to Hitler and Hitler's ideology. We're dealing with the same thing. Though we don't call it Nazism or Aryanism, it's still a violation against the humanitarian rights that Christ helped to bring into an existence over 2,000 years ago. That's one of the reasons why that he was attacked. That's one of the reasons why that he was charged falsely in false pretenses towards basically being a blasphemer, simply because the people over there at that time seeing Christ as him being a entity that would jeopardize their livelihoods and jeopardize the positions that they was playing in. The priests, the holy men, the rabbis, etc. To this day, that same evil demonic entity that was against Christ then is still alive and well today. And you see the evidence of it more so over there than you do just about anywhere else, but it still exists all over the planet. What we're dealing with here is a supernatural force that can literally go in and bewitch either a few people or many people or a whole bunch of people at the same time towards bringing fear and intimidation into their hearts and minds to the point that they radically raise up their hands and surrender. This is done only through psychological warfare, or let's take it to another level, spiritual warfare. Because by and large, according to the statistics that I've listened to in the past few days, the people in Afghanistan was well trained and was well financed and had the proper measures in front of them that at the very least they could have held off the Taliban before they made a silent symbolical statement to them that they wasn't going to go down easily, that they was going to go down fighting if they went down, or possibly even defeating them. They had enough experience and enough supplies that they could have taken it upon to themselves towards actually becoming that in which what they was saying that they wanted to become, which was independent, which was under the pretenses of democracy. So it's not our chief and commander's fault, the reason why that this has basically blowed up the way that it has. It's not the American people's fault that has sacrificed and given so much in counseling and teaching and coming in and taking chances, and some of us had to die for it, and a lot of them had to die for it. There was blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of time and effort that went into this. But it was because of this evil demonic entity that has these type of powers that has influenced the Afghanistan people of surrendering and giving up their arms. Now, granted, they'll have to be the ones to live with the consequences, because they did not hold together. They did not hold the line. We gave them the opportunity. We showed them how to hold the line. We demonstrated to them that they could hold the line. But as soon as we turned our back on them, they basically turned into a bunch of cowards. Either that, or they were so frightened and intimidated and infuriated that they didn't know what to do other than to surrender. I'm telling you, these massive spiritual influences, negative spiritual influences, are just as alive and as well today, if not more so, than what they was during the time of Jesus Christ. And the reason why I say that is because we have more technology today, and we're advanced to the point that we can understand and realize what's going on in certain countries all over the world. You know, we got eyes and ears on just about every level to where we understand what's actually occurring. And this ideology, I think, was primarily financed through the Saudi Arabia government, because they're the strongest ones over there that can bring forth this type of a movement through the Sharia law, through a corrupt entity, a evil spirit that is now still in a dominant force that to this day, as far as I'm concerned, is still at large towards masterminding 9/11. Now, I could talk all day long until I was black and blue in the face. And there are certain people out there that is not going to be able to comprehend or understand or accept the things that I'm talking about. Just like this individual right here, this war correspondent right here that's talking. I don't think he's a war correspondent. I think he's up to ranks. He's with the CIA. He's with the Pentagon. He could literally talk until he was black and blue in the face towards convincing people of what has occurred, that instead of Mr. Biden being degraded and demoted for, he should actually be uplifted and promoted for. He took a long risk in saying, this is going to be the deadline, this is going to be the day, and this is whenever we're going to do this. Nobody knew that this spiritual entity was going to basically intimidate or infuriate its way through the land the way that it did towards making people surrender. We figured there would be at least a little bit of resistance. That's the only reason why that they could go in and dominate certain villages and towns the way that they did. Town after town, community after community, was simply because of this evil demonic entity, this spiritual entity that today is more powerful than it's ever been, that talks about these things in the Bible, how that in the last days this evil entity will rise up in great wrath, because he realizes and knoweth that his time is short. No, the Taliban is not to be trusted. They may put on a big front in how that they treat women and how that they feel about women, but the fact of the matter is, it's going to take a long, long period of time of proving themselves to the world that they have taken on a completely different image in comparison to the old Taliban. Besides that, what difference does it make if they have done a full turnaround? They still invaded that country illegally and now are in charge of that country illegally. It would have been the same thing in January the 6th if that movement would have proven itself to be smarter and stronger than the people that was already in power, and went in and dominated those people and took over their chambers and took over their positions, it would have been the exact same thing. It would have been a coup, a takeover. Usually, whenever they pronounce a coup, that means that somebody has went in and killed the opposing leader. But a coup can also be looked upon as being an overtake to where a whole society against its will now is being taken over illegally and now doing something against the will of the people. It's not Mr. Biden, Joe Biden's fault that this has turned upside down the way that it has. If it's anybody's fault, it is the Christian's fault in not identifying the true enemy towards how advanced that this Antichrist spirit is and how strong that this movement not only become back then, but how strong that the movement is today. Because their strongholds in the Middle East, regardless whether it's in one country or the other, minus Jerusalem, strongholds that would only be diminished through and by the holy righteous God and his holy divine Holy Spirit. And even then it's going to be a fight. And it's not just in the Middle East, but it's in Russia. It's in China. It's in North Korea, South Korea. I mean, not South Korea, but North Korea. It's in places that want to dominate and dictate and rule their people in a very, very unhumane, cruel way. This isn't something that we just got exposed to yesterday. This is something that our ancestors fought for, not only during World War I, but also during World War II. Napoleon was looked upon as being a form or a type of an Antichrist figure. Hitler was looked upon as being a form or a type of an Antichrist figure. The third one has yet to rise its ugly head out because of the cowardness that the Saudi Arabias are to begin with towards rising its head up of being a form or a type of the Antichrist figure. This has been projected, looked upon, analyzed, and prophesied on and dissected through the Holy Bible and other prophets that have come out with the exact same thing pertaining to this evil demonic entity. This entity now that is walking around in a fleshly human body that has a head, 2 arms, 2 feet, 2 legs, 2 hands, and a buttocks, and a body that's got blood running through it, but was supernaturally brought into the world by this evil demonic entity. According to biblical Bible prophecy, this entity will show itself in the temple after the temple gets rebuilt for the 3rd time, and it will display blasphemers, blasphemies against the holy righteous God and the Lord Jesus Christ openly and publicly, according to biblical Bible prophecy. That's pretty harsh, but that's what it teaches that will occur in the last days, rather than the world being destroyed by a nuclear holocaust, which Ronald Reagan was dead on. The world ain't going to come to an end by a holocaust. The world will come to an end the way that the humans and the human suffering and God intends for it to come to an end, pertaining to biblical Bible prophecy. And there's nothing that I can do about it towards reversing it or stopping it. There's nothing that individual right there on that platform right now that's talking can do anything about it, and there's nothing that anybody else can do about it. Because once it's in the cards to be played, it will be played that way. It doesn't matter if Northwest Tennessee wants to be a supporter of the founder of the Windmill Ministries or not. It's still going to unveil itself the way that it's supposed to unveil itself in the last days. Once more, I could talk until I was black and blue in the face, and there's nothing that me or this individual or other people can do in persuading people what we're actually up against. Joe Biden knowed that. He knowed that we was up against a supernatural force. But he didn't realize the stronghold that it still had on the Afghanistani people. He figured that after 20 years, he's already been down there 3 or 4 different times. He said that the other day on national TV, that he's actually been to a lot of those places. On the ground, feet on the ground, boots on the ground. Let's listen to the rest of this.
Taliban is the legitimate governing power in Afghanistan now?
Right now,
they're asking questions. Is it a legitimate dominating power or something to that degree? Why do you even want to even think about what the Taliban has done and who they have been in the past towards even coming close of putting them on a pedestal towards a legitimate whatever? That would be like taking a murderer, even though the murderer has had a true conversion towards repenting against his or her sins, and the murderer still going around telling everybody, well, I didn't murder nobody. I didn't murder nobody. And you know, factually speaking, that you know that person did. That's what the Taliban is trying to do right now. They're trying to hoodwink the world in making us think that they have taken on a new leaf. That's what their project is all about. Even at the expense of trying to promote the women as being either equal or somewhat equal towards giving them a little more freedoms. If the people fall for this, they're bigger fools than what I ever thought that they was. Because I guarantee you, they still have the same motives today as what they did in 1992 or 1993 whenever they declared war on the people over in Israel and the American people, and making statements that they was going to be the ones to dominate and dictate to the world towards how people was going to live and how that they was going to die. It's the same type of influences as I just got through talking about pertaining to Hitler. It's just a different era. You can disguise it in whatever color that you want to, but it's still the same antichrist, dehumiliating course that has been trying to succeed ever since the beginning of time towards being the prince of this world. And I ain't just talking about the prince of this world emotionally or spiritually, but I'm talking about the prince of this world in a full bodily government form. That's what they're up to. That's what they want to do. That's what they've set a sail towards doing. Why should we think any different? Even though they might disguise themselves as being a little differently today, why should we think that their motives, that their true heart is any different today than what it was whenever they brought all this chaos into society the way that they have?
Is a chaotic situation
elsewhere. Let's bring in Arwa Damon now for more on that. I mean, I imagine the confusion and just...
Tony, congrats on the promotion.
Seems like I made a mistake here.
Spend an indeterminate
towards
under the age of 40 years old. So it's really the time for millennials to step up and get the vaccine as well.
towards going to hit the wrong button.
Well, in theory, Hala, these are people who.
I'm truly sorry about that. I've hit the button off of that interview. Was my mistake. I'm hoping that he was at the latter part of his interview because he done already said what he wanted to say and he was taking questions. And usually they don't take questions but a certain length of time, and then after that they kill the interview and they go back to work and in behind the scenes. But I did press the wrong button. I apologize for that to my viewers. Let's listen to the rest of this and then we'll carry on.
Trying to get their special immigrant visas processed. The U.S. in its botched effort to try to evacuate those who did end up helping out the United States made a lot of errors in terms of processing these applications. We've been hearing all sorts of stories of, Afghans who worked with the U.S. Arriving at the airport, but they didn't actually have a visa, so they're trying to get on these aircrafts. The bottom line is, because this all happened so quickly and because it was all so poorly organized, a lot of these Afghans ended up not having their paperwork fully processed, but they still have to get out of the country because of the threat to their lives posed by the Taliban. And so in this whole scramble, the U.S. has been talking to a number of countries about moving those who are part of this special immigrant visa program there until they can actually have their paperwork processed to the U.S. But while we're talking about all of this, Hala, of course, those numbers are a tiny, tiny fraction of those Afghans looking to get out of the country. And as dramatic as all of the visuals are that we're seeing right now, one also has to keep in mind that this refugee crisis, this Afghan refugee crisis, it hasn't even started yet because Afghans cannot get out of their own country. Even Turkey is building a wall, a very long wall that it says is almost complete on its border with Iran, because that is the main transit route for people who are fleeing from Afghanistan. And of course, Turkey is the launching point for Europe. Now, when it comes to Europe, no European country wants to see a repeat of the 2015 refugee crisis that was, of course, mostly made up of Syrians and Iraqis. And so a lot of the conversation that is circulating, right now among European countries is, how do we stop refugees from ending up in Europe? And part of the things that are being said by, for example, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is, we need to provide more support for neighboring countries so that Afghans can end up, staying there, more support for UNHCR and that sort of a thing. But I wouldn't be entirely surprised if we began seeing more and more Afghans, in countries where one perhaps would not expect to see them.
Arwa, thanks very much. Arwa Damon reporting live. I'm Hala Garani. Quest Means Business is next. I'll see you tomorrow.
There you go. That'll be all of that. We thank you for listening. Good luck to all of us. I do want to end by saying this. The very things that we are starting to be exposed to today, God had showed me 30 plus years ago of the orchestrator of the Windmill Ministries towards just exactly what was going to occur and how that it was going to occur 30 plus years ago. I didn't realize, by being called into the mission field, that I was going to basically have to go up against so many people here in America that claimed that they had a relationship with the holy, righteous God. But in reality, it goes back to the same old saying, everybody wants to go to heaven, but doesn't nobody want to die to get there, according to the Western civilization over here. I had no idea that I was going to receive such resistance of a movement that didn't stop, hindered the movement of God towards eliminating this evil demonic entity all over the planet and creating democracy, so that one day we would see a revival escalate into a revolution. Come on. Come on. Come on in here. I hear you out here growling. Come on. Come on, Pebbles. Get on in here for a second. You and that other cat, y'all gonna end up killing one another. Cat was growling. Anyways, until the prophecies come true of the meek inheriting the earth, regardless whether it is being implemented because of wars, because of famines, because of diseases, because of whatever, God's will be done. I don't care if the whole state of Tennessee wants to go up against God's will being done, or the whole state of Kentucky, or the whole state of Oklahoma. God's will be done. You can, if you got any sense at all, you can write that down on a rock somewhere, and that God's will be done. For the Bible says that it would have been easier for all of heaven and for all of earth to pass than for one jot or for one tittle of the word thy God to fail. They have been wanting this ministry to fail. And because of it, not only has it slowed the prosperness of the ministry down, not only has it hindered the ministry, but it has caused a backfire upon these devils that has caused this. And now, instead of just a few people suffering, the biggest majority of us are suffering. Now it's come home to roost in their own homes, in their own backyards. Their children are becoming defective. Their grandchildren are being born with all kinds of diseases and problems and mental retardation and deformities. Now it's coming home to those 30 plus years ago that thought that they was going to be able to overpower the will of God. And it's not just happening here, but it's happening all over the land. That they have brought their own agony into their own lives. And until we're willing to see a movement to abolish this type of evil entity, I'm pretty sure it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, regardless of whether it gets worse in the form of Mother Nature, or it gets worse in the form of diseases, or it gets worse in the form of violence here in America, or it gets worse in the form of drugs pertaining to people overdosing, or it gets worse in the form of suicide pertaining to all the children here in America that's committing suicide right now because they don't like what they're seeing. They don't want to be held accountable or responsible for all of this. Yes, the demons over here in America have helped to put the world in a perilous state that now we're all having to deal with. Super, super sad. Good luck to all of us as we enter our program again and again and again. God bless America. God bless our troops. And good luck to all of us who are striving towards a better, righteous, holy, glorious way of life through the Father, the Son, and the power of the Holy Spirit. Good luck to all of us, and shalom.